It isn't. We shall not be diverted from our course. To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning. One of the great debates of our time is about how much of your money should be spent by the state and how much you should keep to spend on your family. Let us never forget this fundamental truth. The state has no source of money other than the money people earn themselves. If the state wishes to spend more, it can do so only by borrowing your savings or by taxing you more. And it's no good thinking that someone else will pay. That someone else is you. There is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayers' money. And prosperity won't come by inventing more and more lavish public expenditure programs. You don't grow richer by ordering another checkbook from the bank. And no nation ever grew more prosperous by taxing its citizens beyond their capacity to pay. We have a duty to make sure that every penny piece we raise in taxation is spent wisely and well. For it is our party which is dedicated to good housekeeping. Indeed, I wouldn't mind betting that if Mr. Gladstone were alive today, he'd be reapplying to join the Conservative Party. Protecting the taxpayer's purse, protecting the public services. These are our two great tasks, and their demands have to be reconciled. How very pleasant it would be, how very popular to say, spend more on this, expand more on that. And of course we all have our favourite causes. I know I do. But someone has to add up the figures. Every business has to do it, every housewife has to do it, every government should do it, and this one will. Yes, the Commission does want to increase its powers. Yes, it is a non-elected body, and I do not want the Commission to increase its powers against this House. So, of course, we are differing. Of course, the chairman or the president of the Commission, Mr. Delors, said at press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community. He wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, no, no. Perhaps the Labour Party would give all those things up easily. Perhaps they would agree to a single currency, to total abolition of the pound sterling. Perhaps, being totally incompetent with monetary matters, they'd be only too delighted to hand over the full responsibility, as they did to the IMF, to a central bank. The fact is, they have no competence on money, no competence on the economy, so yes, the right honourable gentleman would be glad to hand it all over.
There is no doubt that the Prime Minister has in many ways achieved substantial success in the economy. There is one statistic that I understand is not, however, challengeable, and that is that over her 11 years, the gap between the richest 10% and the poorest 10% in this country has widened substantially.
That's right.
How can she say at the end of her chapter of British politics that she can justify many people in a constituency such as mine being relatively much poorer off, much less well housed, and much less well provided than it was in 1979? Surely she accepts that is not a record that she or any Prime Minister can be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, all levels of income are better off than they were in 1979. But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have. And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That is the Liberal policy. Yes, it came out, he didn't intend it to, but he did. Now, order. It is extraordinary transformation of the private sector which has created the wealth for better social services, for better pensions, to enable pensioners to have twice as much as they did 10 years ago to leave to their children. No longer the sick man of Europe. Our output and investment grew faster over the 80s than any of our major competitors. If you'll be a little bit patient, then we get on a little bit further. No longer a doubtful prospect when American and Japanese companies invest in Europe. We are their first choice. Britain is no longer an overmanned, inefficient, backward manufacturing sector, but modern, dynamic industries. The right honourable gentleman referred to the level of inflation. Yes, in 1987 and 1988, the economy did expand too fast. There was too much borrowing, and inflation rose. And that's why we had to take the tough, unpopular measures to bring the growth of money supply within target. Inflation has now peaked and will soon be coming down. Inevitably, the economy has slowed, but we firmly expect growth to resume next year. For the fundamentals are right. Our industry is now enterprising. It has been modernized and restructured. In sector after sector, it is our companies which lead the world. In pharmaceuticals, in telecommunications, and in aerospace. Our companies have the freedom and talent to succeed and the will to compete. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. The Prime Minister is aware that I detest every single one of her domestic policies and have never hid that. It's always a greater pleasure to tackle a political heavyweight opponent than a lightweight leader of the opposition. Who is afraid to explain why, after a lifetime of campaigning to get rid of nuclear weapons, is going to plant 3 tridents in my country. But can I take the Prime Minister back? Take the Prime Minister back to the question of the poor getting poorer. Doesn't she realise, even at this point, which is 5 minutes after midnight for her, because there was a transfer of resources from the poor to the wealthy, that's why the poll tax was unacceptable, and it's because of the poll tax she has fallen.
And I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap were that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way.
Ever since the war, the principal threat to our country's safety has come from the Soviet bloc. 26 years ago, the Russians marched into Hungary. 21 years ago, they built the Berlin Wall. 14 years ago, they reconquered Czechoslovakia. 3 years ago, they entered Afghanistan. 2 years ago, they began to suppress the first stirrings of freedom in Poland. Oh, they knew the strength of the human spirit. They knew that if freedom were allowed to take root in Poland, it would spread across Eastern Europe and perhaps to the Soviet Union itself. They knew that the beginning of freedom spelt the beginning of the end for communism. Yet, despite these regular reminders of the ruthless actions of the Kremlin, there are still those who seem to believe that disarmament by ourselves alone would so impress the Russians that they would obligingly follow suit. But peace, freedom, and justice are only to be found where people are prepared to defend them. This government will give the highest priority to our national defense, both conventional and nuclear.
Mr. President, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, the bomb attack on the Grand Hotel early this morning was first and foremost an inhuman, undiscriminating attempt to massacre innocent, unsuspecting men and women staying in Brighton for our Conservative conference. Our first thoughts must at once be for those who died and for those who are now in hospital recovering from their injuries. But the bomb attack clearly signified more than this. It was an attempt not only to disrupt and terminate our conference, it was an attempt to cripple Her Majesty's democratically elected government. That is the scale of the outrage in which we have all shared. And the fact that we are gathered here now, shocked but composed and determined, is a sign not only that this attack has failed, but that all attempts to destroy democracy by terrorism will fail. My first guiding principle is this: willing and active cooperation between independent sovereign states is the best way to build a successful European community. To try to suppress nationhood and concentrate power at the center of a European conglomerate would be highly damaging and would jeopardize the objectives we seek to achieve. Europe will be stronger precisely because it has France as France, Spain as Spain, Britain as Britain, each with its own customs, traditions, and identity. It would be folly to try to fit them into some sort of identikit European personality. Some of the founding fathers of the community thought that the United States of America might be its model. But the whole history of America is quite different from Europe. People went there to get away from the intolerance and constraints of life in Europe. They sought liberty and opportunity, and their strong sense of purpose has, over 2 centuries, helped to create a new unity and pride in being American, just as our pride lies in being British, or Belgian, or Dutch, or German. I am the first to say that on many great issues, the countries of Europe should try to speak with a single voice. I want to see us work more closely on the things we can do better together than alone. Europe is stronger when we do so, whether it be in trade, in defense, or in our relations with the rest of the world. But working more closely together does not require power to be centralized in Brussels or decisions to be taken by an appointed bureaucracy. Indeed, it is ironic that just when those countries, such as the Soviet Union, which have tried to run everything from the center, are learning that success depends on dispersing power and decisions away from the center, there are some in the community who seem to want to move in the opposite direction. We have not successfully rolled back the frontiers of the state in Britain, only to see them reimposed at a European level, with the European superstate exercising a new dominance from Brussels. Certainly we want to see Europe more united and with a greater sense of common purpose. But it must be in a way which preserves the different traditions, parliamentary powers, and sense of national pride in one's own country. For these have been the source of Europe's vitality through the centuries.
How would you describe your leadership style?
Clear, decisive, purposeful.
Aggressive, confrontational?
I think where there are times when if you're defending freedom, you have to confront those who are diminishing freedom. What does confrontational mean? It means you fight for what you believe against other people who believe something different.
David Longy says some prime ministers take office, some take power. Which did you take?
Both. But the power I took was the power to reduce the power of government, to reduce the taxation, to reduce the ownership of government. In other words, to limit the powers of government, not to enlarge them.
She addressed me as though it was a Nuremberg rally. It was all go, you know, in the handbag world, and she would proclaim the truth of her position.
David Longy says that when he came to visit you at Downing Street, that you declaimed to him, that you addressed him as if he were in the back row of a public meeting. He said that you spoke as if you were at the Nuremberg rally when he went to see you at Downing Street.
I might say so. That is very offensive, bearing in mind that Britain and the Commonwealth stood alone against Nazi tyranny for quite a time. And unless we had, it would not have been beaten, and the rest of Europe would not have been freed.
New Zealand was part of that, though, Lady Thatcher. Didn't a New Zealand Prime Minister deserve to be treated better than that when he called upon you? I expect other Prime Ministers to be able to argue their case as I can argue mine. What I am saying was that they were denied ports, were denied to us, although we had our ships in the Pacific on their regular duties as part of the defense of the free world, as part of the deterrence against a third world. He says he did argue it with you. You didn't listen.
Oh, I did listen. I had no sympathy with the arguments.
She was able to tell Middle Britain what she wanted. No mucking around. She's the sort of... It's like most British politicians speak as though they were ordering a menu in French. And she was down there. She was actually at McDonald's telling them she wanted a Big Mac.
She wiped out the trade unions. She brought taxation down to a level that the words brain drain just disappeared. But most of all, she made your man standing in the pub with a pint of beer say, "I'm proud to be British."
When I went in, Britain didn't count. She was a country not only in decline, but had accepted decline. I came out. Britain was not in decline. She had led the world on rolling back socialism. She'd led the world on what to do and how to do it. And she'd also been the first country in the world to say that aggression should not pay. The first country in the world to uphold international law.
Can a leader get to the point of identifying herself or himself with the country of which they are the leader?
Oh yes, I was identified very much with it.
Did you identify yourself with Britain or as Britain?
With Britain.
What I'm asking is, did you get to the point ever where you started to think, I'm essential?
Good heavens, no.